My wife returned from a girl's trip with a secret, so I filed instantly. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. My wife smiled as she opened the envelope, completely unaware it contained high-definition photos of her affair and my signature on divorce papers. I'm Liam, a 32-year-old guy who believed he had won the lottery when it came to marriage. Sarah and I had been married for 4 beautiful, seemingly flawless years. We had the kind of comfortable, deeply trusting dynamic that made other couples envious. We shared a cozy suburban home, a dog, and what I thought were the exact same values. I never checked her phone. I never interrogated her about where she was going. When you love someone completely, you give them the keys to your entire soul, assuming they will protect it with their life. Have you ever looked into the eyes of the person you love and realized a stranger was looking back? It's a specific kind of psychological torture I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Trust is a beautiful, fragile glass house, and once a single crack appears, the entire structure is already doomed to shatter. The devastation of betrayal isn't just the physical act itself. It's the retroactive poisoning of every single happy memory you ever shared together. You start to brutally question every smile, every whispered, "I love you," and every late night at the office. The ultimate cost of my blind trust was my entire reality, but I absolutely refused to be a passive victim in my own life's demolition. I didn't scream, and I didn't beg for pathetic answers when her perfect mask finally began to slip. Before the envelope, before the ruthless lawyers, and before the agonizing nights spent gathering undeniable digital evidence, there was just a supposedly innocent weekend getaway. Sarah had been genuinely stressed at her marketing job, pulling long hours and constantly complaining about emotional burnout. So, when she eagerly suggested a relaxing girls' trip with her best friend Jessica to a coastal vineyard a few hours away, I completely encouraged her to go. I even paid for her luxury spa package as a sweet surprise. I wanted her to feel pampered, cherished, and deeply loved. I stood in our sunlit living room and kissed her goodbye, totally oblivious to reality. I had no idea that my perfect marriage was about to end in absolute ruins. Our home was my ultimate sanctuary, a place filled with laughter, shared cooking experiments, and lazy Sunday mornings. Sarah was a charismatic, beautiful 31-year-old woman who could light up any room she walked into. She had this infectious energy that drew people in, and for years, all of that brilliant energy was focused entirely on me. The weeks leading up to her highly anticipated trip were completely normal. We went on our usual Friday date nights, talked about eventually renovating the kitchen, and discussed maybe starting a family in the next year or two. There was absolutely zero tension, no suspicious late-night texting, and no sudden changes in our physical intimacy. She was just my Sarah. On the Thursday night before she left, I sat on the edge of our bed, watching her excitedly pack her designer weekend bag. Jessica is going to absolutely lose her mind when she sees the itinerary I planned, Sarah laughed, folding a pair of expensive sundresses. Wine tasting, seaside dinners, and absolutely no husbands allowed. I chuckled, tossing a travel-sized bottle of sunscreen into her open bag. Just make sure you guys actually relax. You've been working way too hard lately. She walked over, wrapped her arms around my neck, and kissed me deeply. You are the absolute best husband in the world, Liam. I'm going to miss you so much. I held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her expensive floral perfume, feeling nothing but profound gratitude for the life we had built together. Looking back now, the sheer scale of her deception is genuinely breathtaking. She didn't flinch. She didn't break eye contact. She lied to my face with the practiced ease of a seasoned sociopath. I spent that entire weekend happily catching up on household chores, playing video games with my older brother David, and genuinely looking forward to her coming back home to me. I thought I was meticulously building a solid foundation for our future while she was actively planting the explosives that would destroy it. The illusion of safety is the most dangerous drug in the world because the withdrawal can literally kill you. I had no reason to suspect a thing. Then Sunday evening finally arrived, and the woman who walked through the door felt entirely wrong. The moment Sarah unlocked the front door on Sunday evening, the atmospheric pressure in our house completely shifted. I had cooked her favorite dinner, garlic butter steak and roasted asparagus, to welcome her back from her supposedly exhausting, wine-soaked weekend. I walked into the hallway to greet her, smiling widely. "Hey, babe, how was the beach?" I asked, reaching out to grab her heavy weekend bag. Sarah flinched. It was a microscopic, split-second reaction, but I saw it. She physically pulled back from my embrace, keeping her luggage firmly gripped in her hand. "It was fine, Liam. Just really tiring," she said, her voice completely flat and devoid of its usual warmth. She didn't look me in the eye. Instead, she stared intensely at a spot on the wall somewhere just over my left shoulder. "I'm incredibly gross from the long drive. I need to take a shower right now." Before I could even respond about the hot dinner waiting on the table, she brushed right past me and practically sprinted up the stairs. Have you ever felt a sudden, icy knot form in the dead center of your stomach for absolutely no logical reason? My gut was violently sounding an alarm. I stood alone in the hallway, listening to the bathroom door firmly lock upstairs. Sarah never locked the bathroom door in our own house. When she finally came downstairs 45 minutes later, the bizarre behavior only escalated. She sat at the dining table, barely touching her food. More importantly, her smartphone was placed face down right next to her plate. Over the 4 years we had been married, she had always left her phone casually tossed on the kitchen counter or buried deep in her purse. Now, it was permanently glued to her hand. When a notification buzzed, she didn't just glance at it. She aggressively snatched the phone off the table, shielded the screen with her body, and furiously typed a response before immediately locking it again. The warm, loving wife I had kissed goodbye on Thursday was completely gone. In her place sat a highly defensive, incredibly guarded stranger who treated me like a potential threat. The air between us felt thick and suffocating. I knew something was horribly wrong, but I was entirely unprepared for the actual agonizing truth. I tried to convince myself that I was just overthinking things. Maybe she had a massive argument with Jessica on the trip. Maybe the long drive had just put her in a terrible mood. The next evening, as we sat on the couch supposedly watching a movie, I decided to gently probe the situation. "So, did you and Jess end up going to that specific seafood place by the pier you were talking about?" I asked casually, not taking my eyes off the television screen. Sarah stiffened beside me. The silence stretched out for 3 agonizing seconds before she finally responded. "Why are you interrogating me, Liam?" Her voice was incredibly sharp, laced with a sudden, venomous defensive anger that completely caught me off guard. I turned to look at her, genuinely shocked. "I'm not interrogating you, Sarah. I'm just asking about your trip. You haven't said a single word about it since you got home." She stood up from the couch, aggressively crossing her arms over her chest. "I told you it was fine. We drank wine, we sat on the beach, and we talked. Why are you acting so paranoid and controlling all of a sudden? Can't I just have a weekend away with my best friend without coming home to a Spanish Inquisition?" I sat there, absolutely stunned by the sheer ferocity of her unwarranted attack. The manipulation was incredibly textbook, though I didn't recognize it at the time. When a liar is terrified of being caught, they will aggressively flip the script and make you the villain. They attack your sanity to distract you from their guilt. "Sarah, calm down. I just asked what you had for dinner," I replied, keeping my voice incredibly steady to contrast her rising hysteria. "Whatever, Liam. I have a headache, and I'm going to bed," she snapped, grabbing her phone and storming up the stairs. I was left alone in the dark living room, the icy knot in my stomach twisting tighter. I stepped back, apologizing the next morning just to keep the peace, but the damage was already permanently done. My mind was racing, connecting terrifying dots I desperately wanted to ignore. The blind trust was officially dead. I needed to know exactly what she was hiding, and I was going to find out. The agonizing paranoia festered for 3 long days before she finally made a catastrophic, sloppy mistake. Sarah was an incredibly meticulous person, but maintaining a complex web of lies is exhausting, and eventually, exhaustion breeds carelessness. It happened on a Thursday morning while she was upstairs taking her daily shower. She had taken her precious smartphone into the bathroom with her, a new, highly suspicious habit, but she had completely forgotten to take off her Apple Watch, which she had left charging on her nightstand. I was in the bedroom, quietly putting away laundry, when the watch vibrated against the wooden table. I tried to ignore it. I really did. I stared at that little glowing screen for a full minute, fighting a brutal internal war between my deeply ingrained respect for her privacy and the screaming, agonizing intuition in my gut. I walked over and tapped the screen. It was a text message preview from an unsaved number. It didn't have a name, just an area code. The message read, "Still thinking about how incredible you looked in that red dress on Saturday night. Miss you already." My heart completely stopped beating. A cold, nauseating wave of pure adrenaline crashed through my entire nervous system. My vision physically blurred for a few seconds. Saturday night. She was supposedly wearing sweatpants and drinking cheap wine in a hotel room with Jessica on Saturday night. She didn't even pack a red dress in the weekend bag I had watched her fill. I memorized the unsaved phone number, repeating the digits furiously in my head, and quickly stepped away from the nightstand just as the bathroom water shut off. When Sarah walked into the bedroom wrapped in a towel, smiling at me like nothing was wrong, I thought I was going to violently throw up. "Morning, babe," she chirped, her cheerful tone sounding incredibly fake and grating to my ears. "Morning," I managed to choke out, forcing my facial muscles into a neutral, unreadable mask. I grabbed my car keys and practically sprinted out the front door, gasping for air the second I reached my vehicle. The fragile glass house had completely shattered, and now I had to dig through the ruins. Sitting in the driver's seat of my parked car, my hands were shaking so violently I couldn't even put the key in the ignition. The unsaved phone number was burned permanently into my brain. I immediately pulled out my laptop and logged into our shared cellular provider account. I had never once looked at our detailed billing statements before, but now I was frantically downloading PDF spreadsheets of her call and text logs for the past 3 months. I crossed a massive moral line that morning, but survival instincts completely obliterate the need for polite boundaries. The sheer anxiety of the search was deeply intoxicating and terrifying. As I scanned the incredibly long rows of data, a horrifying, undeniable pattern emerged. The unsaved number from the smartwatch appeared hundreds of times. They were texting constantly during her work hours. They had hour-long phone calls during the exact time she claimed she was stuck in traffic or running errands. But the absolute worst part was analyzing the data usage from the weekend of her supposed girls' trip. Our cell provider tracks general geographical pings for roaming data. The log showed her phone was nowhere near the coastal vineyard she had claimed to be visiting with Jessica. Instead, her device had spent the entire weekend actively pinging cell towers in downtown Chicago, a city located nearly 400 miles in the exact opposite direction. The lie wasn't just a minor omission. It was a massive, carefully orchestrated logistical operation. She had fabricated an entire alternate reality to cover her tracks. I sat in my car for 3 hours, staring at the damning spreadsheets, feeling the profound, crushing weight of utter betrayal pressing down on my chest. Every single memory from the past few months began replaying in my head with a sinister new context. Every late arrival, every sudden need for privacy, every manufactured argument. It was all a calculated smokescreen to protect her secret life. I needed undeniable proof, but I also needed to know how deep the rot actually went. I had to figure out exactly how much her supposedly loyal best friend actually knew. If Sarah was physically in Chicago, then her best friend Jessica was either incredibly oblivious or actively complicit in the betrayal. I needed to know the absolute truth. Jessica was a 31-year-old event planner who had been Sarah's closest confidant since college. She was always over at our house, drinking our wine, eating our food, and acting like a supportive, loyal sister. The next afternoon, I formulated a brilliant, subtle trap. I knew Jessica usually took her lunch break at a specific upscale coffee shop downtown. I strategically parked a block away and walked in, pretending to be completely surprised to see her sitting at a corner table with her laptop. "Liam, hey, what are you doing in this part of town?" she asked, smiling brightly. The sheer hypocrisy made my skin crawl, but I forced a warm, oblivious grin. "Just had a client meeting nearby," I lied smoothly, sliding into the chair opposite her. "I've actually been meaning to talk to you. I want to plan a surprise anniversary getaway for Sarah, and I wanted to ask about that vineyard you guys went to last weekend. She refuses to tell me the name of the restaurant you loved so much." Have you ever watched someone's brain violently short-circuit in real time? Jessica's smile completely froze. Her eyes darted aggressively around the room, desperately searching for an escape route. "Oh, the restaurant. Yeah, it was great," she stammered, picking up her coffee cup with trembling fingers. "What was the name of it again?" "Sarah said you had this amazing seafood pasta on Saturday night." I pushed, keeping my tone light and conversational. Jessica took a massive, nervous gulp of her latte. Right? The pasta. It was Luigi's? No, maybe it was the Harbor House. Honestly, Liam, we drank so much wine the whole weekend is kind of a massive blur. She let out a high-pitched, incredibly fake laugh. She was a terrible, sloppy liar. The alibi was entirely fabricated, and Jessica had actively helped her build it. I thanked her for her time, bought my iced coffee, and calmly walked out of the shop, my blood boiling with quiet rage. I now knew that my wife had a willing accomplice in her disgusting, heartbreaking deception. Knowing the trip was a lie was one thing, but I needed the undeniable, physical proof. That evening, Sarah left her laptop open on the kitchen island while she went upstairs to take a remarkably long bath. She thought her digital life was completely secure. I walked over to the machine, my hands sweating profusely. I knew her standard passwords, but her main folders were completely clean. Then, I remembered she used an obscure, secondary cloud storage account for her freelance graphic design work years ago. I opened an incognito browser, navigated to the site, and typed in her old email and a password she used for everything back when we first started dating. The screen loaded. My breath caught violently in my throat. Right there, in a clearly labeled digital folder titled Chi-Town 2026, was the absolute smoking gun. I opened the folder, and my entire world violently collapsed in on itself. There were dozens of high-definition photos and video clips. Sarah, wearing the infamous red dress, smiling brilliantly while pressed against a tall, wealthy-looking man I didn't recognize. Photos of them drinking expensive champagne in a luxury hotel suite. Screenshots of their explicit text messages, detailing exactly what they were going to do to each other, and mocking me for being so incredibly naive and trusting. I saw digital receipts for a 5-star hotel booked entirely under his name. The physical, visceral shock of heartbreak is impossible to accurately describe unless you have survived it. It feels like all the oxygen is instantly sucked out of the room, and your chest is being crushed by a concrete block. I had to grip the edge of the granite kitchen island just to keep my legs from completely giving out. I stared at a photo of my wife kissing another man with a level of passion I hadn't seen from her in over a year. The betrayal was so profound, so meticulously calculated, that it completely broke my brain for a few agonizing minutes. I quickly downloaded the entire folder to an encrypted USB drive I kept in my pocket, cleared the browser history, and carefully closed the laptop just as I heard the bathroom water draining upstairs. I wiped the tears from my face and prepared for the hardest performance of my life. The absolute hardest part of discovering you've been brutally betrayed isn't the initial shock. It's the agonizing necessity of keeping your poker face intact while sleeping next to the enemy. For the next 2 weeks, my life became a waking, suffocating nightmare. I had to wake up every single morning, look at the woman who had completely destroyed my reality, and smile. I had to eat the dinners she cooked, listen to her complain about her mundane day at work, and lie in our shared bed, knowing her body had recently belonged to someone else. It required a level of psychological endurance I didn't even know I possessed. Every time she kissed my cheek, I wanted to violently scream. Every time her phone buzzed, I had to suppress the overwhelming urge to smash it against the wall with a hammer. I was drowning in silence. I finally broke down and called my older brother, David. We met at a loud sports bar on the other side of town where nobody would recognize us. The second I sat down in the booth, the dam completely broke. I showed David the printed photos and the hotel receipts. He stared at the evidence, his jaw tightly clenched, his eyes blazing with protective, brotherly fury. "I am going to completely ruin this guy," David growled, gripping his beer glass so hard I thought it would shatter. "No," I said, my voice trembling but incredibly resolute. "This isn't about him, Dave. It's about her. If I explode now, she'll just gaslight me, manipulate the narrative, and try to take half of everything I've built. I need to be smart. I need to be entirely ruthless." David took a deep breath, recognizing the cold determination in my eyes, and slowly nodded in agreement. He was a pragmatic, logical guy, and he knew exactly what had to be done to ensure my absolute survival. "All right, Liam. You play the loving husband for just a little bit longer," David advised, sliding a business card across the sticky table. "Call this guy tomorrow morning. He's the most aggressive divorce attorney in the entire county. It was time to stop crying and start actively preparing for absolute, devastating legal warfare. The next morning, I took a sudden, unannounced personal day from work and drove to the sterile, intimidating downtown offices of lawyer Miller. Miller was a man in his late 40s with cold, analytical eyes and a demeanor that completely lacked any unnecessary empathy. He didn't offer me a tissue or a sympathetic pat on the back. He just looked straight at the thick folder of evidence I slammed onto his mahogany desk. Infidelity is incredibly common, but finding a client who is actually smart enough to gather concrete proof before confronting their spouse is incredibly rare, Miller said, his tone dry and efficient as he flipped through the glossy photos of Sarah's secret Chicago getaway. He laid out a meticulously aggressive legal strategy. Since we lived in an at-fault state, this undeniable evidence gave me massive, overwhelming leverage regarding the division of our shared marital assets and potential alimony claims. Over the next 3 weeks, under Miller's strict guidance, I essentially became a ghost in my own financial life. I quietly opened a brand new, completely private bank account at a different financial institution. I systematically routed my direct deposits away from our joint checking account. I changed the incredibly complex passwords to all of my personal credit cards, my retirement portfolios, and my cloud storage servers. I gathered our mortgage documents, the car titles, and our previous tax returns, making secure, verified digital copies of absolutely everything. I was aggressively building an impenetrable financial fortress, securing my future before Sarah even realized a storm was brewing on the horizon. The entire process was incredibly exhausting, but it provided a strange, therapeutic sense of absolute control. I was taking my power back, document by document, dollar by dollar. Meanwhile, at home, I continued to play the role of the incredibly oblivious, loving husband. I bought her flowers. I asked her about her day. I watched her lie to my face repeatedly, cataloging every single deception as fuel for the impending fire. The trap was perfectly set, but she almost triggered the massive explosion entirely by accident. Despite my absolute best efforts to maintain the perfect poker face, maintaining a massive, life-altering secret inevitably creates a subtle energetic shift. Sarah was an incredibly manipulative, perceptive woman, and around the beginning of the 4th week, she started sensing that I was pulling away. The distance between us wasn't physical. It was a deeply rooted, psychological coldness that I simply couldn't hide anymore. She went into aggressive damage control mode. The gaslighting and defensiveness completely vanished, immediately replaced by intense, suffocating love bombing. She started cooking my favorite elaborate meals every single night. She bought me expensive colognes and left overly affectionate, handwritten sticky notes on the bathroom mirror. It was utterly nauseating to watch her perform this fake, desperate routine, knowing she was still actively texting her wealthy Chicago lover while I was in the shower. The closest call happened on a Friday night. We were sitting on the couch watching a movie, and she suddenly shifted her entire body weight against mine, resting her head on my chest and trailing her manicured fingers down my arm. "You've been so incredibly quiet lately, Liam," she whispered, her voice dripping with manufactured, fake vulnerability. "Are we okay? I feel like you've been a million miles away from me." She leaned up, attempting to initiate physical intimacy, her lips brushing against my jawline. Every single cell in my body violently recoiled in sheer disgust. I felt a massive surge of adrenaline and almost completely snapped. I wanted to scream the truth right in her face. I had to bite the inside of my cheek so hard I actually tasted copper blood. I forced myself to let out a long, dramatic sigh, brilliantly playing the stress card. "I'm so sorry, babe. It's just massive pressure at work. They're restructuring my entire department, and I'm totally exhausted." I lied smoothly, pulling away and rubbing my temples. She bought the excuse completely, relaxing back into the couch cushions with a satisfied smile. I had successfully dodged the bullet, giving myself the final crucial days needed to prepare. With the legal paperwork completely finalized and my financial assets fully secured, I entered the final, crucial phase of my silent operation. I had to ensure that when the absolute chaos finally erupted, Sarah couldn't destroy anything that actually mattered to me. Over the course of 3 carefully planned days, while she was busy working at her marketing agency, I systematically stripped the house of my irreplaceable personal history. I packed up my late grandfather's antique watches, my irreplaceable family photo albums, and my expensive professional electronics. I quietly moved all these boxes into David's secure, climate-controlled basement across town. To Sarah's incredibly self-absorbed eyes, the house looked exactly the same, but the soul of my existence had already completely vacated the premises. The final step was organizing the presentation of her ultimate destruction. I didn't want a messy, screaming, emotionally chaotic argument where she could easily deny, deflect, or gaslight me into confusion. I wanted a surgical, completely undeniable strike. I went to an upscale office supply store and purchased a beautiful, sleek black presentation folder. Inside, I meticulously arranged the physical evidence like a prosecuting attorney preparing for a major murder trial. Page 1. The highly explicit, undeniable photos of her and the wealthy man in the Chicago hotel suite. Page 2. The detailed, highlighted cell phone logs showing the thousands of text messages and the damning geographical location pings. Page 3. A printed transcript of her absolute worst, most mocking text messages about our marriage. And finally, sitting heavily at the very back of the pristine folder were the fully prepared, legally binding divorce papers, already sharply signed by me and notarized by Lawyer Miller. I placed the black folder securely inside a beautifully wrapped, incredibly expensive-looking gift box adorned with a massive red silk ribbon. It looked exactly like a thoughtful, romantic anniversary present. Everything was meticulously arranged, perfectly calculated, and ready for deployment. The sheer anticipation was absolutely terrifying, but my resolve was completely unbreakable. I placed the beautiful gift box on the dining table and waited for her return. It was a completely ordinary Tuesday evening, which made the impending execution even more poetic. The weather outside was cold and rainy, a perfect contrast to the blazing inferno about to erupt inside our quiet suburban living room. Sarah walked through the front door at exactly 6 o'clock, shaking her wet umbrella and complaining loudly about the horrendous evening traffic. "I am absolutely exhausted, Liam. Please tell me we are just ordering terrible takeout tonight," she sighed, dropping her expensive leather purse on the kitchen island. "Actually, I have a massive surprise for you," I said, my voice incredibly calm, completely devoid of any underlying emotion. I gestured toward the beautifully wrapped, red ribbon gift box sitting perfectly in the center of the dark wooden dining table. Sarah's eyes immediately lit up with genuine, greedy excitement. She absolutely loved receiving expensive presents. "Oh my God, Liam, what is this for? Our anniversary isn't for another 3 months." She squealed, practically skipping over to the table. "Just a little token of my incredible appreciation for our wonderful marriage," I replied smoothly, leaning against the kitchen counter and crossing my arms tightly over my chest. She eagerly untied the massive red silk ribbon and pulled off the elegant cardboard lid. Her manicured fingers reached inside and pulled out the sleek, heavy black presentation folder. She looked slightly confused for a brief second, expecting jewelry or a luxury vacation itinerary. "What is this? Some kind of boring investment portfolio?" she asked playfully, flashing me a brilliant, completely fake smile. "Just open it, Sarah," I commanded, my voice dropping an octave into a cold, terrifyingly serious register. She slowly opened the heavy black cover. I watched her incredibly arrogant, beautiful face as her eyes registered the very first page. It was the high-definition, undeniable photo of her kissing the other man in the luxury Chicago hotel suite. The silence in the house was absolutely deafening. The illusion of her perfect double life completely shattered right there in the dining room. Watching a master manipulator's brain completely short-circuit when presented with undeniable, catastrophic evidence is an incredibly surreal experience. For the first 5 seconds, Sarah completely froze, staring at the glossy photo as if it were written in a foreign language. Then, pure, unadulterated panic aggressively flooded her features. Her hands began shaking so violently that she actually dropped the heavy black folder onto the floor, scattering the explicit photos, the damning text transcripts, and the formal divorce papers across the expensive hardwood. "Liam, this isn't what it looks like," she stammered hysterically, her voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate squeak. It was the most pathetic, predictable cliché she could have possibly uttered. It looks exactly like a luxury hotel in downtown Chicago, Sarah. The exact same weekend you were supposedly drinking wine with Jessica. I replied, my voice as cold and hard as solid concrete. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stared at her with absolute, suffocating indifference. That coldness completely terrified her. She fell to her knees on the floor, aggressively grabbing the divorce papers. You filed for divorce? Liam, please. It was a massive mistake. It meant absolutely nothing to me. I love you, she screamed, massive tears streaming down her face, completely ruining her expensive makeup. When the desperate crying didn't instantly work, the vicious manipulation attempted to resurface. You drove me to this, Liam. You worked too much. You neglected my emotional needs, she shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. I let out a dry, humorless laugh that echoed loudly in the quiet room. You can aggressively gaslight your new boyfriend, Sarah, but that garbage doesn't work on me anymore. The locks on the doors are being changed tomorrow morning. You have exactly 2 hours to pack your bags and get out of my house. She collapsed into a sobbing, pathetic heap on the floor, realizing her incredible manipulation had finally failed. I stepped directly over her crying body and walked out the front door without looking. The immediate aftermath of the explosion was incredibly chaotic, but I had insulated myself perfectly against the blast. Sarah frantically packed her bags and moved into a cheap apartment, aggressively funded by her new, wealthy Chicago boyfriend who quickly realized he had inherited a massive, dramatic liability. I immediately blocked her phone number on absolutely everything, communicating strictly and exclusively through Lawyer Miller. Within 48 hours, I had completely and permanently severed all ties with Jessica and the rest of our mutual, toxic friend group who had either actively covered up her disgusting affair or willfully turned a blind eye. I brutally cut the rotting cancer completely out of my life, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation or fake apologies. The legal divorce proceedings were incredibly swift and brutally efficient. Thanks to the overwhelming, undeniable evidence and my aggressive financial preparation, I kept the house, my retirement accounts, and my absolute dignity. Surviving a betrayal of that massive magnitude permanently alters your DNA. You mourn the death of the person you deeply loved, while simultaneously realizing that specific person never actually existed in the first place. It is a grueling, painful process, but it is also profoundly liberating. If you are reading this and your gut intuition is violently screaming that something is wrong in your relationship, absolutely listen to it. Do not let a manipulative partner aggressively gaslight you into questioning your own sanity. Gather your undeniable proof quietly, secure your financial assets meticulously, and strike back with cold, calculated precision. True power doesn't come from screaming, crying, or begging for closure from a liar who fundamentally disrespects you. True, undeniable power comes from realizing your absolute, inherent worth and calmly walking away from the toxic burning building. Today, I am genuinely happier, incredibly healthier, and completely free. The absolute greatest revenge you can ever achieve is building a brilliant life without them.